This is Truth Frequency Radio.
The wicked ones obviously under heavy Masonic influence.
Coming to you live and direct from the phantom shores of the ghostly Hudson River. It is the Summer Solstice show, and my name is Ra, and I am here to awaken the dormant particles that are spiraling inside your DNA. So come with me as we go further down this mystic spiral of life inside the Eye of Ra. Each and every week we unveil the different shades of you, the different shades of me, until we all vibrate that truth frequency. Welcome everybody. It's Saturday night here. Yesterday was the summer solstice. It's June 22nd, 2019. And we are here during the Ember Days of the summer solstice. And like I said, my name is Ra Castaldo, and you are inside the Eye of Ra. And this is Truth Frequency Radio Network. You can find me at themysticalspiral.com. You can find me at patreon.com/themysticalspiral for the most mind-blowing subscription in the world. For just $2 a month, you get yourself in the door. The higher platforms will get you way more. But for the price of a slice of pizza basically a month, you get info that will change your life, and hopefully it will get you going down your own spiral of research and experiences where you're actually working from your heart. When you work from your heart, you experience a spiritual realms like no other way. When you work from your heart, when you live from your heart and not just in your mind. You know, you have to spiritually open up your heart is what I'm saying. And then the other worlds around you will embrace you. And you'll have spiritual awakenings. Now, tonight, we are going deep down the spiral once again inside the Eye of Ra. Welcome everybody in the chat room. Thank you for joining us. It's a beautiful day out here. It's finally not raining here in New York. It's been like Seattle over here for the last few weeks. Literally gloomy and rainy, but we have a nice sundown right now. And yesterday was the longest day of the year, and it is one of the Ember Days. Now, if you're new to my information, and by the way, tonight Gary Wayne will be my guest, and he will be joining us at the bottom of the hour. That'll be 4:30 Pacific, 7:30 Eastern. And we will be talking about the dragon bloodlines that are still running the elites of the world today, and Vlad the Impaler and his dragon bloodline, and how these are the bloodlines of the Rephaim and the Nephilim. So we're going to be continuing this. We're going to be talking about the societies of the dragon, the society of the blood, and how it's still running some of our world today. Now, you got me for the next 22 minutes, so hopefully I can get a lot accomplished before we bring Gary on. I have a lot to share tonight, and after this, if you're not a patron of mine, you can always join my Patreon and join us in the Zoom chat tonight, because we will be having a Zoom chat tonight. We have them throughout the month, several times a month, as long as and daily information. Now, if you're new to who I am, if you're new to my radio show or my information, or my lineage that I've been a part, that my soul has been a part of for countless eons of generations, preparing for this time now on our planet. Now, my family line has been called many things, and one of them is the Benindante, and which basically means like the good walkers. Now, it's very difficult to try to describe it exactly what we do, but my soul, my every fiber of my being was called sort of like a spiritual mission in my early 20s. And this has to do with my hereditary download, my hereditary mission and who I am. Each person, sometimes it does skip generations, but usually in every generation you have one that carries on this trait and passes it down. And the Benindante are basically ones that fight to cleanse the collective consciousness of their communities, their family, humanity, and those around us. We fight thought forms, destructive and debilitating thought forms that are negative, and that arise within people. They can get projected on people through insecurities. They can be, you can make them yourself. They like I said, they could be installed within your energetic bodies, sort of like a code within your energetic layers. And what do I mean by this when I say this is if you're listening and you're new to energy work or you're new to alternative radio, we have a physical body, but we also have energetic layers around us that are part of us. We basically have 5 bodies incorporated within our human vessel. And we have our physical body, of course. We have our aura, we have our spirit, we have our astral, and we have our soul. Our soul keeps them all enclosed within our physical body. Now, those auric layers, if you want to say, or energetic layers around us can be imprinted with codes, imprinted with symbols that can change who you are, change your emotions. They can block things. They can enhance things. There's good and bad in everything, of course. And last night was what we call as a Benindante. And of course, the Benindante being good doers or good walkers, we have also the other side of the coin, which is the Malandante. The ones that are taking, that means the bad doers, basically. The Malandante are like bad witches or bad shaman, evil shaman. And what makes them evil, well, to them, they're not evil. To them, they're just doing what they want. What makes them evil is that they take from the abundance of our earth. They take from our earth to get what they want. And they use the elements of our earth to manipulate the forces to get more materialism, more power, both spiritually and physically, no matter who it hurts, no matter who it takes from, no matter who it cripples, no matter who they have to walk on. They'll have sex with whatever they want. They'll manipulate somebody even if they don't want to have sex with them through magic or through sorcery or some sort of way. So there's people that will eat whatever they want. They'll do whatever they want whenever they want in order to get more of what they want. It's just more about controlling forces just so you can get your way. And it's a dark aspect of spirituality and spiritual technology. But they take from the earth, from the abundance of the earth and its humanity in order to get what they want. And we fight against these evildoers, these Malandante. And not only do we fight that, but we are fighting the spiritual residue of the fall of man. So I will get to that in a second and what I experienced last night in these Ember Days. And when this happens, I will sleep like I'm dead for like a few hours. And it's literally where your soul leaves your spirit will leave your body and travel into the other dimensions. And you will stand up because on these days, the equinox, the solstice, all the elementals gather, especially on the summer solstice. This is where, on a multi-dimensional level, councils gather, warriors gather, elementals gather. There's all sorts of elementals, from the Undines to the Sliffs to the Gnomes to all these different types of elementals. They all gather. All these holographic codes within the Matrix gather on the summer solstice at dusk. And there are negative and destructive and horrific thought forms that need to be cleansed. And the Benedante, we fight this collective evil that's basically infiltrating the minds of humanity like an alien barb, literally, with the different faces of the draconian dragon plugging in to your energetic layers, to your energetic chakras, if you want to call them, plugging into who you are. And it's a force that pierces from generation to generation to generation like an evil virus, like an evil mental virus. It'll pierce like an out of control bullet flying through the spirituality of generations and generations, invading your mind like an alien force, invading you. And these are the disembodied spirits of the Rephaim. It's my understanding that from all of my research, from all of my experiences, that these are what disembodied spirits are, and they have been waiting for this change on our planet. And my family line and other Benedante families or clans, if you want to call them warrior tribes, we all have groups, and we get together and battle against these evil forces. There's a war between these armies of light and dark, and it's upon us now. Now, this is not just a shamanistic warrior group. We are working with the forces of nature, and the forces of nature are inside of everything. They're supernatural around everywhere. What you see as supernatural is just natural to my family line and other family lines. The fibers, everything is animated with around you in the spiritual realms. And some people are able to tap into this through certain psychedelic experiences and things like this. But you can do this through meditation and through certain Ember Days. We go right into these certain fields where you're in a zone, different quadrants of the spiritual realms of the holographic universe. And different families will carry different flags and different insignias on them as well. And it's a really interesting what takes place in these Ember Days. Now, like I said, the Ember Days are on solstices, equinoxes. This is actually, we have documented proof of the history of my family line. Going all the way back to the 15th and 16th century in Inquisition testimonies. And we saw ourselves, and just like now, we see ourselves as warriors of God, hounds of God even, because a lot of us, we can transform and shapeshift in the astral. And I know that word shapeshift has been demonized, just like the word witch and just like the word occult has been very demonized. Shapeshifting is a part of shamanism. It's about transforming into the different animal side of your spirit, where you have different powers in the astral. And this is a very powerful force. Now, last night was one of the Ember Days for me, for everyone that's involved in this. And whether you know it or not, whether you answered your calling or not, and for those that have not heard my story, I'll brief you on a second on my calling. In my early 20s, I was in 2002. I'll be 41 this year, but in 2002 was when I answered my Benedante calling. And literally, I got up in the morning like I was hearing the sound of a tribal drum beat. And I was walking down the street with my eyes on the sky, and going through a spiritual awakening, ripping off my clothes as I'm walking towards a park that was on the 33rd parallel in Long Beach. And people have heard my story before. I'm not going to go through the whole portal story, but that's when it was when I entered my calling, and I entered the first realm of the Ember Days and the spiritual realm. And this was on an Ember Day of the winter, of the winter solstice is when I did this. So this was a powerful moment, and it was when I answered my calling. And typically a calling will last for 20 years as a benindante, and when you're around 40 years old, you have a choice of whether to continue as a benindante or retire and give it up forever. And I have continued my calling. And last night, and that's why I feel like I've been experiencing certain health problems in the last few days and weeks, because this is the final battle. This is when you're at your peak, and especially at 40 years old as a benindante, you go through the hardest battle you're ever going to go through, and you make it out alive. Then you have succeeded, and you will continue your life as a healer and a warrior, and you take a different role in the benindante clan. And now I have moved on to a different role, and I have lived through my final battle. And my final battle of that warrior was last night, and now I take a different role in my benindante clan as a shamanistic wisdom maker and a part of the council of my Ember Days family. And you know that I came back with info last night that is going to take me a long time to sort through and understand correctly. I'm going to say a little bit of it tonight, but I saw mind-blowing things. And the one thing I want to stress is that all the volcanoes I've been talking about, asteroids, all of this happening, earthquakes, and if you look on my Patreon, you'll see my volcano and earthquakes reports that are taking place every few minutes. We're having the pillars of the foundations, the pillars and foundations of our world, even the heavens, they're shaking. There's an awakening taking place. And there has been vessels on our planet that have been programmed and weakened and baptized into certain faiths to be able to take on the consciousness of these fallen ones. When these vessels inhabit these consciousness, there will be a new race on our planet and a new Rephaim. And during this summer solstice, there was a new goddess being brought in. A new goddess through the rose portals, through the rose rituals, the rose thorn rituals as well, which is exactly what happened with Christ, pierced by the rose thorn. It happened to the Aztecs. There's that recurring technology of being bled by a rose thorn and opening up a portal that way as well. And there's many things that go along with that. Now, first of all, the summer solstice. And I know I only have 8 minutes before Gary gets brought on, so I got to try to get this out quick. And like I said, if you like what I'm talking about now, if you want to continue this, patreon.com/the mystical spiral. We're going to have a Zoom chat tonight. And the summer solstice is about the rose. It's about the rose, and it's about the goddess. It's about beauty and blooming and bringing in the goddess and blooming the rose and opening up the rose and opening up the rose with the goddess emerging. This is the symbolism of the summer solstice, and this is what practiced by the occult. And there's a variety of rituals that I've seen, that I've read about, that I've experienced that go along with summertime, summer solstice. And there are covens trying to bring in a new virgin goddess. And they're using the darker aspect of these rituals that only want materialism and money and to enchant people and hypnotize them with materialism. And they're using the energy and the vibrations of music and artists and people that are high stature of our society, like Madonna, to open these rose portals through rituals. And Madonna is one of these characters that has been used as a vessel, and she's been groomed from day one, like a virgin, like the virgin goddess, like the new Madonna coming into the world, and she's not the new goddess. She's a pawn in one of the rituals to help bring that energy in, and it's involved with the France cathedrals, the Notre Dame cathedrals, and I don't have time to go all into that tonight, but I've been doing extensive work on these Notre Dame cathedrals ever since Notre Dame de Paris got burned in the ritual, in the Knights Templar ritual. And if you go to my Patreon, you can find a lot more information on that, and I'm going to do a whole show based on that already, and I've already done one with Gary Wayne, and he'll be on in a few minutes to do another show about the Dragon Bloodlines we're going on tonight. But I've done several shows about these rose portal windows of Notre Dame, and there's still so much more to unfold about this topic. And the more I research it, the more that comes to me and gets activated within my psyche, and we learn about this. So last night, I saw a monster volcano, and now I believe it was the volcano in Russia that erupted last night or this morning. I saw. Now I was basically flying with a cloud. I know that sounds crazy, but I was traveling to a certain area, and I know it's going to sound weird, but I saw the guitarist B.B. King sitting on a cloud and playing his heart out like he was playing for his life. And there was this volcano that exploded, and it had like this yellowish and green and crazy, I think it's called a plume of smoke that went into the sky. And it was connecting the sky to our world, and I saw things traveling within the smoke, and something was emerging from the smoke, and the flowers and the blood that was coming out as lava was turning into red flowers, and it was emerging, and then I saw that smoke consume, I guess you want to say, consume B.B. King, and it made him disappear, and it took him over. Now, I was expecting to wake up this morning and see that he had died. I don't even know if he's still alive anymore, B.B. King. I haven't checked if he's still alive. I was full expecting me to wake up this morning and found out that he's dead. And if he is already dead, then I definitely know that he is working in the spiritual realms as a Benedante or some fighter for the cause, and he was using his axe as a spiritual weapon. Wow, so he did die a couple of years ago. That's very interesting. That's very, very interesting. That's very interesting. So that's a shout out to BB King too, man. So let's talk about. Now, I only remember a little bit of what I've just described to you. I know it sounds all out of whack and it's not really coherent. I only remember a short part of the visualization of my travels last night. But when I woke up with info that I got. When you have these battles, if you make it out with your sanity or alive, you come back with info you didn't have before. And this is what you're fighting for. You're fighting to cleanse the collective consciousness and open up valuable information that you need to fight this fall of man. Now, I do believe that basically there was a trick that happened. There was something happened that tricked man in a way. There was something that happened where we were sent into this physical realm to rebalance duality, because spiritual technology was misused. If you want to call Adam, we were once just in the spiritual realms as a spiritual being, and the spiritual technology was being misused for one side. If you want to say the man side, or whatever you want to say, light, dark, whatever you want to use, if you want to, feminine, masculine. But there was one side of the force that was misusing it. And it caused this fall of man. And this spiritual residue of the spiritual technology of the in those realms has been duplicated. And that's what we are interacting with as technology in this physical realm now. And I know it's hard. I'm trying to describe it the best way I can and not use too much of a word salad. But technology is not new. Controlling the environment for technology is not exactly what we're supposed to be doing. And we're trying to control the environment with mechanics. And we've been doing it for a very long time, going back to windmills, even things like that. But technology has become the only way that we can produce now. The only way, it's been linked to our consciousness. And we are being sped up where a month or several months of activity is taking place in one day. And technology, spiritual technology, and the technology that has been duplicated and that's running this realm has this ability to duplicate our activity and transform, which is already in existence. Oh, wow. I'm coming up on break already. Wow. So I didn't even get to get into, guys, you got to join the Zoom tonight so we can get deeper into this. Coming back on the other side right now is my buddy Gary Wayne. You can check him out right now at Genesis6conspiracy.com. Don't go anywhere because Gary friggin' Wayne is in the house, baby. Stick around.
Real people, real radio.
Initiating the truth frequency.
This is Truth Frequency Radio.
Welcome back, everybody. You are here inside the Eye of Ra, and we have an amazing treat for you tonight. My buddy Gary Wayne is back in the house tonight, and you can find Gary at Genesis6conspiracy.com. He has a book by the same name, Genesis 6 Conspiracy. He's been a regular guest here on Eye of Ra, and it's an amazing addition to our show when we have Gary Wayne joining Truth Frequency Radio. It's a blessing to have him and his knowledge here each time, and I hope he looks forward to these shows as much as I do because it really is a blessing having him here tonight. Tonight we are talking about the bloodline of Vlad the Impaler and the Society of the Dragon, and this fraternity, if you want to call it, or cult, can be even traced back all the way to 2100 BC in Egypt, to the Dragon Court of ancient Egypt. And we can be talking about this all night, and it's going to be really interesting to hear what Gary comes up with tonight. And sit back, buckle in, and get ready because Gary Wayne's here with us. And Gary, it's a pleasure to have you back tonight. Welcome, my buddy.
Well, glad to be back, and what a topic to talk about. This
really is.
Goes in about a billion different directions, and all of it absolutely fascinating and compelling. So, yes, happy to be back and looking forward to the show.
That's you said it perfect. It could go into so many ways, and we can go down so many avenues. So I'm just gonna let you, take start and lead the way, and I'll follow where you go because I know you probably have a where you want to start and what you want to get into. But this is a pharaoh, an institution of pharaohs, right? This is a group of pharaohs that basically kings, a bloodline that was started and that's still being continued to this day.
Exactly. It is an allegory and a reality. So when we talk about dragon bloodlines or the dragon court or the Order Draconis and all the different sort of variations that go with it, understand these are the genealogies of the royal elite that trace their bloodlines back to particular Nephilim and to fallen angels. And the purity of that bloodline is so key within the hierarchy of their cult and culture and religion. And so they track it and they place very high importance on the pedigree of those bloodlines. And the ones who are at the leadership of the families are, as you mentioned, part of these secret societies. And these are, the royal secret societies of only the bloodlines. And they have coded allegorical names for their families at times. And it's recognized within that allegory of who they are and what their standing is. And some of those orders that you may have been referring to in the first part of the show, I'm not sure whether you talked about it or not, but you have the Sarkani Ron, which is the Order Draconis, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, which is of the sort of the Eastern Slavic and German kingships and continental Europe that was reorganized in about 1400 by Sigismund, who Vlad III was inducted into in about 1439. So it's interesting that you have the individual that the Dracula character is based on, who is a king of Wallachia and governor of Transylvania at that point in time, and is inducted into the Order Draconis, which is, again, to put the drag kingships back on the throne and to continue the pursuits of Thoth, which is that Egyptian sort of equation that you're entering in, because, yes, the fairy kingdoms, the pharaoh kingdoms are all part of this. And I think on shows past, I've talked about a matriarchal bloodline, which is the fairy bloodline or the owl bloodline. And you have the patriarchal bloodline, which is the dragon bloodline and the raven bloodline. Again, all of those imageries go back to particular aspects of the angelic rebellion and hierarchy of that rebellion. So when we look at some of these royal orders, there's also other ones that would be of different families than where Vlad comes out of, even though those bloodlines would be intermarrying. And we'll probably come back to that down the road. But understand that this was a trait right from the beginning with the original Metallic Dynasties and the original dynasties after the flood, that these Rephaim and Nephilim kingships, to keep those pedigrees pure, would intermarry. So this is something that sort of comes down the tradition, as is drinking blood, a typical Nephilim and Rephaim and secret society trait, because it's, again, all part of this legacy that they continue. And so there's a few other orders, just to throw out a few, but there's so many other ones, and there's also the ones that are out of China and elsewhere. But there is the Royal Order of the Golden Fleece, which is more to Central and Western Europe. And if I said Western Europe earlier with the Slavic, Russian, and German ones, I meant Eastern. And also you've got which is the real, and the Golden Fleece is about knowledge, and it's an antediluvian story, but the one that really sort of points the direction to their
it's almost like
historical legacy is the...
It's almost like with the
Golden
Fleece.
I was going to say
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No,
it's almost like with the Golden Fleece too. It's like they're wearing a garment to experience more, to get like a hyperdimensional download, almost like a Leviathan. Like they want to wear the skin to get more information.
Yeah, it's part of the thought process, absolutely. So when they are in their trances, their meditation, their rituals, they would have special garb to do that. And of course, that's if people are familiar with the Habsburg-Lorraine dynasty, which the Anjou come out of, and the Payon and the Bouillon kingships. And Anjou is going to be very important as we backtrack into some history on this in terms of Vlad's bloodline. Is a very, very important name that links back to them. And so the other order that I was going to mention, which sort of caps it all, because I just don't know how you could be more obvious than the Swedish Order, which again has similar sort of crossover icons within their imagery, which is the Knights of the Seraphim, which are the serpent watchers of Genesis 6 and the watchers of Enoch. So, I mean, they couldn't be more obvious with some of their imagery if you take some of the time just to actually look at it.
Yeah, and I think it's like a lot of these groups, like the Rosy Cross, the Rosicrucians, all of this is like really important for this time of year right now too, because during the summer solstice, it's about bringing in the moon goddess. It's about roses. It's about opening portals inside the rose and having a virgin goddess come out. And this is what's practiced in the occult during summer solstice. And just like this singer Madonna and all of these artists, they're being used as tools in these rituals, Gary, to bring apart this energy and this. I believe they're trying to bring in a new virgin goddess to be a mother to this new race that's upon us, and it's really frightening.
Well, I think
what's happening.
It is, and I think they're masters at being like the Wizard of Oz behind that curtain, pulling the strings, right, and the levers, and so they're able to manipulate with the brainwashing and the infrastructure and everything that they have so many different people to carry out their rituals that they don't even know they're doing at times, and at certain times and dates, so that they can fulfill their obligations to their religion and the worship of their gods.
Yeah, it's so true too, and even like I mentioned the singer Madonna. I mean, from day one, it seems like she was groomed for it. I mean, she came out with the song "Like a Virgin." Her name's Madonna, and it's like she's helping bring in that new virgin goddess for the occult. It's
she's a Kabbalist, right? If you track her, so she would
wears
be out
the
of
red ribbon and
Jewish
everything.
mysticisms. Yeah. So she would be one of those ones that would be, I think, very familiar with all of this, or at least a willing participant, and not thinking, maybe not thinking too deeply on what she's doing. But I think she's a learned, willing participant, as opposed to many of the other ones that are actually manipulated. And her name and everything, that she seems to sing about is all occult ritual, right? So I don't think that's coincidence with her. And also, which wasn't coincidence, when I mentioned de Bouillon, Anjou, and de Payon, they are part of these bloodlines as well, that married into the Habsburg dynasty for the in the Royal Order of the Golden Fleece. But they also formed the Knights Templar, who we talked about on the last show a lot, in terms of Notre Dame and the technology that they brought back out of Jerusalem. In 1288, there's a occult ritual in the castle of Geysers that is called the Cutting of the Elm, and what's going on is the inner order of adepts feel that the Templars have lost their way. And they've just lost Jerusalem, and and the Templars, they feel, are too focused on banking and wealth and other things. So you have a splitting away of these inner group of adepts, and they're going to start another group that is going to continue after the fall of the Templars, and that's the Rosicrucians. And so in 1317, 33 of these members actually go to the French Pope at that time to try and have the Knights Templar reorganized, but they are rejected because the Catholic Church was going to have 33 people controlling that new organization of Knights Templar and directly answerable to the Pope. And so they said, no, we're not going to do that. And those are the 33 invisible ones who the Committee of 300 answer to, who the Rosicrucians answer to. And so these are the original sort of adept Rosicrucians that are starting this organization and funneling that infrastructure downward, so that when you get into the Rosicrucians, only 50% of them are these. Now, what's important about that is as I roll that back, that was 1317 when they reformed that. And in the early 1400s with Sigismund, he recreates the Order Draconis, to put the dragon thrones back on, and he is supported by these Rosicrucian adepts. So the east and the west of Europe, and because they intermarry, are very, very close and are supporting this whole endeavor. And so now we arrive back at Vlad the Third again, who is the character that Dracula is based on, and that is just an allegory for their bloodlines. And so when we look at Dracula, this is somebody who drinks blood, and that is very much reflective of the Nephilim drinking blood, as we mentioned a few minutes ago.
Yeah,
you have
even in
the fangs.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, even in like some of the Strega bloodlines that we call Malandante in the Italians, it's said that they travel by night to drink the blood of children while they sleep. You know, so it goes back in those bloodlines, and they're actually called Strego, Stragone, or which comes from Strix, which means screech owl. It's all connected to some of them. Going back in my family, we fight them spiritually in my family lines. Battling them spiritually.
And screech owl is Lilith.
Yeah.
As you take that back into Hebrew, right? And she was a blood-sucking Lamia, and of that same sort of tradition. And the Strigoi is also Romanian for witch and for vampire.
Yeah.
That comes from the Latin Strix that you talk about. And, of course, Vlad is from Romania, from Transylvania, right? In Wallachia.
And Vlad the Third that you were just talking about, Gary, he wasn't, of course, Vlad the Third. Of course, he wasn't the first. Vlad the Second, he was another prince, right? And before him, and he was like a military guy and of Transylvania. And do you know anything about Vlad the Second? Because this was where he was in part of the Society of the Dragon, of course, and the Bram Stoker, is that taking from Vlad II or Vlad III?
Typically Vlad III, and I'll come back to that as I give a few more references to some of these allegories. But yeah, Vlad II was known as Dracula, and he comes out of a bloodline that goes back to the house of Berab of Wallachia, and I'm not going to go through all of their genealogies, but Vlad II, and there's also a Vlad IV as well. So just so that but Vlad II is obviously Vlad III's father, and he was of the house of Draculeste and was called a Dracul, or a dragon, or like a pendragon that comes out of the eastern or the western variation of the Tuatha De Danann and Celtic of the
pendragon,
of the Celtic, right, head dragon. And so you put an A in that at the end as a suffix on Dracul, and you get son of a dragon, and that's where Stoker drafts the name Dracula from for Vlad III. That's why I say I think it was based on Vlad III.
Yeah,
and so
he had
this is
to
a
have
bloodline
of them.
Yes, he did. He had extensive knowledge, and I'll give you a few examples here in just a second. And so this bloodline, Vlad III, that goes back to the Berab name and I think great-grandfather, that actually goes back to the Scythians, which once we start unpacking that's going to really take us back into some interesting directions into early post-Diluvian period and before the flood. So when we talk about Vlad, he was also known as Lord Draconis or Lord Dracul, and he was an overlord or an Oberon of Scythia, is kind of how those titles were called and worked. And so Oberon, you might, for people familiar with Shakespeare, will be familiar with him as being the king of the fairies. And so the king of the fairies is again the matriarchal bloodline, and the dragon is the patriarchal bloodline. But Oberon is married to Titania, which is a female. and it's part of the LB gens, which goes back to, which is the gene of Albion, of the Elven fairy bloodline. And of course, Albion is related to Gog and Magog as Iapetus or Poseidon being their father. And so this is a Tuatha Danann title, and it derives from Upper, which is an import from the Tuatha Danann of the old Tuatha Danann that moved over from Scythia, deriving from the Scythian and Sarmatian, which are the dragon and serpent people, from Upir and the tradition of the vampire. And of course, Upirs were night operative vampires, as in the tradition of Dracula and Vlad, who's the Prince of Darkness, right? So they're starting to build the character that Dracula is based on. And so Vlad III was an Oberon, overlord of Scythia, and he was a noble Celt, because the Tuatha Danann and the Celts and the Gauls were all the same people intermixing in around the Black Sea region, and Transylvania was one of the main centers, and migrating north and east and west, all through Europe and Russia. And they have fair skin, pale white skin, which is what the Celts and the Tuatha Danann were always known for, as milky white skin. Just as Vlad had pale skin and Dracula has pale skin like a dead person, right? And he had reddish hair, Vlad did. And so does Dracula. And he had hazel eyes. And these are traits of what they call a noble Celt. This is a Tuatha Danann trait. This is a Scythian trait. He was educated at the mystery school of Solomon in Austria. So now you've got that occult, mystical, Kabbalistic Egyptian religion that's mixed in, which is why they were such a significant part of the Order Draconis. And he was adept of the Starfire culture, which you were alluding to, and orders that drank blood.
And when you say Albigens,
it just sort of goes on and on. Yep.
Yeah, and when you say Albigens, for people listening, you basically mean like Elven bloodline, right?
The Elven fairy bloodline. And of course, you have a sister religion to the Cathars in the time of the Templars called the Albigensians, where you have the Albigensian Inquisition from the Catholic Church that comes because they had grown so powerful, they were rivaling the Catholic Church at that time. And so
wasn't there like some
savage war, so to speak.
Wasn't there like some savage Albigensian crusade at one time too?
Oh, huge! Absolutely huge. It was a slaughter of unbelievable proportions. Not one of the more favored pieces of Roman Catholic history, but in that time, that religion was also rising, and they would have done the same thing to the Roman Church. So it was more of a survivability in the way things were done at that time. And Vlad, just going back to Vlad, he was affected by sunlight and had to be a night, just as vampires are affected by sunlight, right? And his powers were elevated by drinking blood or the starfire, and also given immortality. And just as the Nephilim in Enoch drank blood to increase their cognitive abilities and to increase life after life was limited to 120 years in Genesis 6:3. So now you overlay that the Dracula character based on Vlad is the enemy of Christianity and is going to prey on Christians, and you have this metaphor that is, good versus evil, depending on which side you want to be on that, and are opposing enemies just as they have been throughout history between the fallen race and the descendants of Adam and through the Seth line. So everything that you look at in terms of Dracula and Vlad is all about Vlad's history. And it's just astonishing that so much was put in. So when you say Bram Stoker had to be aware of it, absolutely he had to be aware of it, because there's no way you can get that kind of detail in without researching it or being provided that information. Just as what goes on in Hollywood today in so much of their, whether it's superhero movies or horror movies or what have you, it's like they're provided the information or they've been indoctrinated into that information. And now when we take that Dracul title that Vlad and his father had, and we look at that, where does that word come from? That goes back to the Greek word drakon, for serpent. And of course, serpent is the same as dragon in the ancient understanding. And some dragons flew with wings, and some were in like the sea, like a hydra dragon or a leviathan dragon, right? So there's different types of dragons, but they were considered the same thing. And just as seraphim angels are the serpent-faced, winged, flying dragons out of Isaiah 6 and the Watchers, as we mentioned, of Daniel 4 and Genesis 6. And as you take that back into its sort of etymology, if we can put it that, is Drakon is also the root word for Draconia, which is Latin for to watch, as in watcher. And you also have the ancient holy crocodile named Draco, which would be akin to Sobek in the dragon kingship of the pharaohs, and the root of the Pendragon title that goes to the Tuatha De Danann and the Celts in Wales and other parts of England as they take on the Pendragon title. And Draco is Latin or Roman for dragon. So all of this is been guarded, protected, preserved, and made famous all throughout history. And none of this is coincidence.
In the chat room, they were asking which Vlad was the Impaler. That was the third, right? Or was it the second?
Yeah, no, that's the third. And
yeah.
He's quite famous for, protecting Europe from the Ottoman Empire and the Islamic incursions of that period of time.
Yeah,
but
the son of Dracula.
Very, very vicious. Yeah, very, very vicious in how he went about that, no doubt about it.
Yeah, well, wasn't there people on stakes and all that? And people on stakes. And that was during the Albigensian Crusade, right? Where they had all people on stakes and they were being burned.
Yeah. That as well, but what Vlad was doing is he would impale them on the end of a stake through their rear end, so to speak, and then stick that on into the ground and let gravity force their body down.
They would slowly slide down it.
Yeah. Now, where he took that tradition from is from the Tuatha De Danann, or the Scythians that moved into the Middle East, and people might be familiar with the Assyrian dynasty of Mesopotamia. They did that, and that tradition goes back right to the early time of the flood. It was a tradition that the Rephaim and the Nephilim did, and the Nephilim did before the flood as well. So this again, what he did was just a legacy of his history.
All right, we're going to pick this up left off. We got Gary Wayne in the house. And it's interesting, Gary, because I would, if I was them back in the day, I would have put all those people on stakes like that. Maybe in the border of the city, so if anybody tried to invade, they would see that and want to leave. But stick around, everybody. We got Gary Wayne here and Spiral.
My name is Ella.
You must unite what has been set asunder.
We are TFR. Truth Frequency
Welcome back, everybody. You're here inside the Eye of Ra, and you have found the Truth Frequency Radio Network. It's June 22nd, 2019. This is the summer solstice. Few days here, and we are in a transition into summer, and it's a beautiful night out finally tonight here in New York. We got Gary Wayne as guest over there in Canada. It's been raining here for weeks, and finally it's nice right now, but I think Gary's got a little bit storm going on. And if you're just joining us, we are talking about the Society of the Dragon and Vlad the Impaler and his bloodline and how it goes all the way back to the pharaohs of Egypt, and it's continuing to this day. Now it's interesting, Gary, because I have a few things before I give you the mic again. There's a few questions in the chat room as well, but I wanted to mention too, like on the summer solstice in the occult, let's put it that way, in to most covens and things like this, that they believe, and it's pretty across the board that they believe on summer solstice that all the elven races gather at dusk, and they gather at dusk for a council and meetings and rituals, and there's something that takes place within the elemental forces on our planet on summer solstice. On a multi-dimensional level. And last night, there was volcanic eruptions in Russia, and I had a weird dream about things taking place, and I do feel like rituals were done last night to help further this mission of this new world religion, and to rule every inhabitant within it. And it's very interesting when you start to think about things like this and go down this, because people go through their daily lives, and most people don't even think about what's taking place behind the scene and what's really going on. They're so preoccupied with bills and everything, it's hard to even grasp certain things. So it's really interesting. And the one other thing that I wanted to comment on before I give it over to you is, you brought up the school of Solomon. I didn't want to lose my train of thought. You brought up the school of Solomon, that he was Dracula was taught from, and he comes from the school of Solomon. Basically, it's interesting because I found a little bit of information at what links Bram Stoker to that, and how he might have gotten some information that way is in the mountains in Austria. I think it's in Austria or near Austria. There's and this was referred to in a book called Land Beyond the Forest by a Romanian folklorist. And she talks about how Bram Stoker was acquainted with her work, this woman's work. So and she talked about in this book that there's a vampire cult in Europe, regarding the schoolomance, or the school of Solomon. And she refers to it as like the devil's school. And Bram Stoker was known to be well acquainted with her work and her writings, and so that's definitely where he got the Count Dracula story and the historical Vlad name, because like you said, there's no denying. You don't just pull that out of the air, that name and that connection. So he had to have prior knowledge, even though he doesn't mention it in his book. He had to have prior knowledge to it.
Sorry about that.
Sorry.
No problem. I was sneezing, so I had my mic on mute.
I was like,
there's no doubt that he had inside interface. It could have been that. There's no doubt he had inside information, and it's a typical sort of organizational structure, again, with the Rosicrucians, who are the ones who are going to establish more of the modern mystery schools and education centers. And so you have, for example, we mentioned Shakespeare just quickly with Oberon and how educated he was. And of course, he had no Oxford education, even though he wrote like an Oxford-educated nobleman, and he was the son of a butcher. And there's just so many things that he couldn't have done, and that's why most people think that, Bacon actually was the writer, and he published under Shakespeare's name and pseudonym. And what Bacon did, who is, again, one of the kingpins of secret societies and Rosicrucianism and alchemy of his age, what he did was he created two societies of writers that were designed to write plays, and with given certain subjects they were indoctrinated into. So initiates into the secret societies and the nobles, and that was the Spear Sakers Society, which goes back to Apollo and Athena, and the Knights of the Helmet. And so we have that sort of tradition. Now you roll that forward into Tolkien and Lewis, who are taken in by a branch of the Golden Dawn order to be educated in Rosicrucian history, and they form a outer layer group called the Inklings to do the same thing that Shakespeare was doing, so that they can keep their history alive in literature. And it then comes as no surprise that Bram Stoker is probably part of these initiates and the secret societies and the bloodlines, who's educated now at the School of Solomon and learns about all of this and continues that sort of art form. And with Tolkien and Lewis, there's no way they're not considered Freemasons, and people say they weren't part of secret societies, but you wouldn't be able to be part of the Rosicrucians unless you were already an adept. And so they learned this at a young age. So what happens inside the secret societies and the bloodlines, if you're a pureblood, you're initiated from childhood, and you're taken well beyond third degree of the York Rite, which is the same as the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite and first level of adepthood. If you are initiated from childhood as a pureblood, you cannot take a third degree or 33rd degree title until you're of age. And so they're called what they call a 32nd degree adept. So if you ever hear that, that's generally what they're referring to, but their adept level would be considered much higher. And I've heard as high as 9 degrees. Some people say there's 12 or 13. And so they were already adepts. That's why they were permitted into the Rosicrucians to learn this and as part of bloodlines that would permit them this sort of access and knowledge. So I think that's just all part of that sort of tradition. So when you talked about these royal orders and, the people behind the scenes, which they actually are as you move up the hierarchy beyond the Council of 33 and into the ultimate leaders of the families, they are going to meet on the most important polytheist occasions and Sabbaths and celebration days of the year, whether or not it's the summer solstice or it's All Hallows Eve or it's the winter solstice and even the equinoxes as well. They are going to meet on those dates and others, and they're there not only to do the rituals and the sacrifices and to celebrate their tradition, but they're also moving forward in terms of how they want to bring about the New World Order with a world government and present one of their dragon messiahs. So again, that all makes, sort of perfect sense. I had also mentioned earlier on that this intermarriage thing is their tradition, and they do that to keep the bloodlines pure. And it kept on going right through to World War I and beyond. And World War I was just an interfamily, so it was an interfamily fight because they were all interrelated. They were all cousins. Roll that forward to today, and if people want it, I'll get a hold of me through my website. I'll send you a few links where Prince Charles is on record on this.
Yeah, right.
Is that he says his genealogy goes back to Vlad.
Yeah, he's saying it.
He's saying it, and it sort of goes back to, obviously to his mother Elizabeth.
You read my mind too. I was
George
just thinking
the
that.
Sixth, and George the Sixth, is obviously the father of Elizabeth, and George the Fifth of England intermarried into this bloodline that comes 8 generations or 9 generations before, back to Vlad the Fourth, and it's done through a daughter of I can't remember the name, but marries into Duke Alexander Württemberg, and that produces this chain of events that's now going to get them intermarried into the English Windsor family. So again, this is not an unusual thing. And Prince Charles, he's actually saying that he's considered the legitimate heir to the Transylvania and Wallachia dynasties. So we'll see whether or not he actually inherits that or not.
I wonder if that's what 23andMe
just shows you how. Yeah, probably. That was a good one. And but it shows you how important they value that pedigree and those genealogies, and they keep them all the way back into prehistory and into the mists of time. So, as we roll back instead of forward, I just wanted to show that these bloodlines are intermixed and are continuing to be intermixed, and it's the people that you were talking about that are meeting regularly to bring about globalization. The ones who are pulling the strings.
No, I definitely was going to bring that up sometime tonight. If you didn't, for sure.
Oh yeah. It's just you just need to. I mean, people will have different pieces of the puzzle, but they tend not to put the puzzle together. And you need to put those pieces together so you can see the full picture. And and so if you understand that they're meeting on these very important dates to them in their religion, then you would understand with the power that they wield, they're doing something else than just the celebration. It's just makes perfect sense. So the Scythians are the predecessors of Vlad's line, as we talked about. And the Scythians are the ones who escaped Tartarus after the flood, according to polytheist traditions and history and religions. And as I said, they go south into the Middle East and become the Rephaim, and they're like the Mary Anu. They start the Mitanni dynasties, the Kassite dynasties. They create the hybrid bloodlines of the Hittites that come from Seth and an intermarriage there. They also start the Pharaoh dynasties, right? So, and this is sort of not normally understood by people, that they're the ones who create these dynasties that I talked about, and I like to call them metallic dynasties, as Daniel likes to describe them in Daniel 2, that are going to dominate the Middle East and the world empires, and which the end-time empire is going to be coming from. So it makes sense that these guys are meeting, as you were mentioning, to bring this about, right? Yeah. And they also go west into Ireland and into Scotland as they migrate out. And they also go into Russia, Germany, and Romania, as we talked about. And when we talk about Romania, specifically Transylvania. And these are where the Black Sea princes come from. And it's also, and people may be familiar with Skoda and the start of the Scottish nation in terms of taking that name, and her being a daughter of Akhenaten, who escapes to Spain and then Ireland to intermarry with the Tuatha De Danann. Again, that's a linkage of that old dynastic part of the Tuatha De Danann, or Tuatha De Danann, if I say it accurately, and I should. I don't always. And also, and intermarries somebody named Neil out of the Black Sea, who's a Scythian, right? And so you have a new dynasty being started with Skoda as the matriarch marrying a dragon prince out of Scythia.
Well, what's interesting. If I could stop you 1 second there, so I don't lose my train of thought. I don't mean this. What's interesting too about the Scythians and the Black Sea, that I don't know if you mentioned them before or not, but it made me think of the Sarmatia or Sarmatians, and they had like they would dress up like in greenish color with scales on them to make them look like lizards, and the Sarmatians, they had like dragon banners and stuff like this. I don't know if you're familiar with the Sarmatians. I think they were like the Scythians, or
Yep.
you know,
They are
right?
they are a kin branch, and I cover them all off in my book for people. And you're right, they wanted to look like a dragon because
Wow.
the Scythians
Yeah.
and the Sarmatians, or the Sarmatians, as some people also say it, wanted to look like their ancestors, right? And they also wanted to look fearsome, but it's green scaled armor that they were wearing, and they also used to flatten their heads to enhance that serpent type look.
Wow.
But yeah, they're
Yeah, I knew you would know more than me about that.
branches, as with, and so they also intermarry into that Pendragon dynasty as well, and I cover that off in my book as well. So for people who want to get more into that level of the detail, so
this is like
and
the
there's
red
going to be
dragon
another
too, right?
kin brand. Yeah, this is the red dragon. Yes, and that's in the Welsh, flag that they still have today, right? And it all is imagery that goes that they're putting out, that are taciturn language about their genealogies and their history. And so on that Skoda marriage that we're talking about, some people might know that as Meals of Pan, as one of the names that comes out in different legends, and there's Gadriel or something like that. That's another name also, but it's all about this Black Sea prince that comes out of Scythia. And so it's interesting that they're going to take as pure blood as they can to start a new dynasty with a pure blood that comes out of the matriarchal line, which is the typical way you have to have first, and they add that to a king of Scythia. Now, here's why that's important. The Nephilim, who escaped Tartarus or the abyss after the flood in these legends and traditions, that escape route was located in Transylvania. And we also see that word Tartarus in the Bible in 2 Peter 2:4, where the English translation is hell for Tartaru, which is Tartarus. And so, again, all of those sort of meanings in terms of escaping out of the abyss, or the prison could be a prison alongside of the abyss, as Ezekiel likes to talk about. But the imagery is quite similar, and you have this location in Transylvania where these Scythians escape, who are the parent sort of tribe to the Tuatha Danann, and I'll get into some of that, how that name is made up, in a few minutes, I hope. But this has Sumerian type writings on tablets that are discovered that predate the Sumerians and back to about 3500 BC. And this is where is their epicenter to repopulate the post-Diluvian world with the survivors of the Nephilim from before the flood. And again, that comes from Lawrence Gardner, who is one of the genealogists of the royal bloodlines. He's now dead, but he wrote several books. And if you haven't read any of Lawrence Gardner's work, you want to see somebody who goes into great detail, you have to read his book. And I quote him extensively in my book, just because he's so knowledgeable, and his list of titles are just absolutely astonishing.
I do as well. I've used some of his material tonight. Yeah. Yeah.
So he's very, very good. And so it's interesting. So now we have the Scythians, who are the ones that are sort of starting all of these major bloodlines after the flood. And they all sort of go back to the central place in Transylvania where Vlad III ruled, Vlad II and Vlad IV, and who the character Dracula is based on. And none of this is a coincidence. It is absolutely been kept alive, whether it is totally accurate or not, but alive throughout history through all of the writers, because all of this is written down by classical writers and historians. So you can trace all of this. So there's something that's going on with the noble class, which is the Nephilim bloodlines and their cousins, because they set themselves up in that orca structure to rule over humans, to keep this history alive and in front of us, and sort of hidden in plain sight, so to speak.
Yeah,
And
it's interesting
we
because
get
sometimes like with some of these books like that you mentioned, like I'll come to my own conclusions and then I'll read it in one of these books that they came to the same conclusion or have the same information there, and it's like it's such a confirmation when that happens. I mean, it's intense.
right. And what's interesting is that these Scythians, even though they seem to be from the mythology, they transcend the Greek mythology in part of the names that they have, and they interconnect into Egyptian history and mythology and into Sumerian history and mythology, so that the Scythians are known as also, as I mentioned, the Tuatha De Danann, who, Danu can also be, a mother goddess, as in Diana, and Danu in Irish, in Greek, and Etruscan and Roman history. But also, Danu is Anu, and Tuatha is tribe of Anu.
Yeah.
Which is the parent for the Anunnaki, the parent god for the Anunnaki. So it just sort of encapsulates that whole Middle East, and then where they expanded to out of the Middle East afterwards into all of Europe, and where all of the royal families come from. And this is the Tuatha Danu and the Elbigens that we're talking about. And, Elbigens, although it's, gens, that part, it goes back to a single patriarch. So there would be several of these patriarchs where people would take their bloodlines back to. And I don't know how many they take them back to that they say escaped out of the flood or somehow survived the flood some other way. But inside that culture, they definitely have those genealogies, and, I know they would know exactly how many of those specific bloodlines that they're talking about.
And this is Enki and Enlil and all of them involved with that bloodline, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are the shining ones of Anu. These are the shining ones, just as Nephilim were known as shining ones, just as the Tuatha De Danann were known as shining ones. They actually shone from their eyes. Their eyes glowed, and it would light up the whole. And they had the original Nephilim, as we've talked about in shows past, looked like their parents. In the original generations, they looked like a serpent, right? And again, everything sort of connects itself right back. And this is the elven bloodline, which is the fairy side, and the dragon bloodline from the patriarchal side. And again, they'll track both sides of their pedigree, so that will have a double-fold effect in terms of where they fit in the hierarchy.
Yeah, so we have a few questions in the chat room. I know you're always willing to answer questions.
Mm-hmm.
One, they said, did they drink only family blood from their bloodline, or is it any blood? And I don't know if it's, one question I want to add with that too is the term Holy Grail, is that come from sangreal, from the actual like sangreal, like the drinking of blood, and to add to that as well?
So let's start with the Grail, and there's a couple of words, and it's a play on words as well, because sangral is a chalice, right? That's Sangraal.
Yeah.
And that goes back to Sumeria, where they used to drink blood out of these goblets. And the Scythians didn't actually use a goblet; they used skulls to drink the blood out of. But the same thing, it's the Graal. The play on words is Sangreal, Greal, and Sangreal, Real, both meaning the same thing, bloodline. So when they're using that word, they're not using they're using the superficial chalice aspect that we know the Grail legends and stories are about, but the true meaning is it is the bloodlines that are encoded in those stories. And so it's the bloodlines of these royal families and these kings. So anytime you are reading Holy Grail literature, it's that same sort of literature that we were talking about before that's designed to encode their genealogies, their history, and their belief systems. And in this case, they use a superficial gloss of Christianity to do the propaganda. And again, I'll talk about that extensively in certain parts of my book. So that's absolutely what is going on there.
All right, so we're going to end up going to break in 30 seconds anyway, so we'll continue that when we get back from break. Everybody, we have the one and only Gary Wayne here in the house. You can check Gary out at Genesis 6 Conspiracy.
This is Truth Frequency Radio.
No hate, no hype, no fear. Real people, real radio.
Is the Truth Frequency Radio Network. My guest tonight is the one and only Gary Wayne. Thank you for joining us. You can find him at Genesis6Conspiracy.com. And we'll continue right where we left off after the break, I guess. And I want to let everybody know, because sometimes we close right away because we're going so much into the topics that at the end of the show we don't get to close. I want to let you guys know that next week my guest will be Maria Wheatley. She's an old pal of mine. She's an expert dowser, an expert on Stonehenge and Avery. And you can find my guest tonight once again at Genesis6Conspiracy.com. His name is Gary Wayne. You can also contact Gary on Facebook. He does daily posts, and he's working on a new book. You can find his book on Amazon, his website, and various other places. You can get, I'm pretty sure you can still get signed copies as well from his website. And so, Gary, before the break, we were talking about some of the questions from the chat, and one of them was asking, do they only drink the blood of their ancestors, and which ancestors? Is it only women? Is it menstrual blood?
Well, there's a combination of things, and for different reasons as to the type of blood that they would drink. I think, and you see in the quickening rituals of that's allegorized into this energy enlightening that was in the I'm trying to think of that TV series where there can only be one.
Oh, Highlander.
And it's a fairy quickening.
The Highlander.
Highlander, yes.
Yeah. That
they would absorb that energy in, right? And that, again, that's just another Nephilim story where, because they fought each other.
Wow.
They want to be the controlling influence and power on Earth, and there can only be one as an Antichrist in the end time. And you can see that if you start digging into some of the allegories of the Highlander, you see it's just written all over this, and the immortality and everything else. And that's an allegory for taking on the power of somebody who is like them. So I wouldn't think that they would necessarily drink of their own family unless they were an adversary within the family. But again, I'm not an insider, so I don't know. But I certainly would not rule out that they would drink from a rival family if they could, and they certainly did in the past to sort of gain that energy and strength from them. They will also drink menstrual blood because that's part of the Starfire tradition. Typically, though, I think what they're going to be doing is drinking more of is human blood and gaining power and increased cognitive ability, extended life. At least that's what they're hoping to do, and to satisfy their gods. within their rituals of this drinking of blood from humans who they consider mundane and just cattle for slaughtering and for sacrifice. So I think all three. And I know I'm hoping the person who asked the question was hoping to get one single answer on that. But this tradition drinking ritual is such a key part of their tradition that to me it makes sense that they have different types of blood for different occasions. And as you take that back into prehistory, whether or not it's in Egypt or Atlantis, they used to mix blood with a wine to also drink it. I don't know whether that was just to thin it down or it was again for another type of ritual, but they did all sorts of different things with the blood.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. But I agree with you, Gary. I mean, it can't be just one answer. It's got to be a combination of them all. There was one question too about I don't know exactly specifically what they wanted to get from it, but they said, what about the blood from Christ's side? I don't know what they mean.
Well, I know.
What about the fluids from Christ's side?
I know. From the side that they were collecting, I'm sure they would have sought after that. Whether or not at that time they would have actually,
that's what they mean,
believed he was of that. He was actually the Son of God because he was rejected so resolutely, and it was just a sort of a small little thing that was going on in one of the more consequential countries of the secular world of that time, right? But if they had and believed that he was actually, the Word made flesh from God, just as the Magi understood who he was to be when they went to visit him at the birth, that information still would have been there, and it may have been set up to gain his blood just before he died because it would have would have been considered super powerful, right? So, and again, I don't have the level of understanding to know what they could do with it, but you connect the dots and you would say, yeah, that would make sense. But it was also typical of the crucifixion to make sure they were dead. That's why they would stab them with the spear, right? So
make sure they don't
it's hard
move,
to know whether or not that is. Yeah, it's hard to know whether the story would be built on after the fact or it was designed. So, but it's interesting that would be raised for sure.
Yeah, that is very interesting. Let me see if there's any.
I was going to throw out that I didn't get to the Anjou that I had mentioned earlier.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Talking about the Tuatha Danu. The Anjou are part of this bloodline that's been that comes through the Celts and the Scythians and the Tuatha De Danann and all of the intermarriage. And there's different branches of the Anjou, just as you have a Sicilian branch and you have the branch out of the Lorraine region in Europe, and you also have an eastern branch. So it's a rather large Anjou sort of set of houses. It's because it's one of the more ancient houses. And the name comes from An, heaven, and U for Anu, the god who creates the Anunnaki giants, right? And Anjou in French, the U or the Ju would be, for the word you. So it would be you from heaven or, the people of Anu, however you want to define that. And this is the family that is part and considered descendants of the last Merovingian, Dagobert, who's part of the founders of the Knights Templar that we talked about earlier on in the show, and then a part of the Lorraine region where the Cross of Lorraine comes from. The double cross is their bloodline, another iconology on their bloodline. And this is the same family that produces the Plantagenets, who cross over to the kingships of England, including the King John and King Richard, who succeed the Rollo line of William the Conqueror. And you also have, just to extend it one other step further, and I'm sure everybody in the audience is likely aware of it, that at least with the presidents from President Bush backwards, they all had a genealogical genealogical connection to the Plantagenet, and particularly King John of the Magna Carta. And again, that just shows you how they keep those genealogies and how all of that just sort of just keeps turning over and over and over throughout our history.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, actually. I mean, that's very intense. I mean,
Yeah.
Just think about how this could have been, how this to be planned that way, and to continue that, and to be able to establish a power where you're taking over the country and passing it down from one president to another. I mean, the amount of power that they've accumulated, and quite possibly it could be because of this technology and this rituals that they were doing, and by drinking the blood, they're actually like becoming something else, becoming something less human even.
Yeah, they think they're becoming more than human, right?
Yeah,
they're becoming more godlike. So all depends on which way you want to move on that scale.
They're becoming like the gods, like the sky gods. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And there was one other group that I would like to throw out that I think creates the bloodline of Vlad III. And we talked about the Sarmatians, and we talked about the Scythians. There's a third group, and I'm not talking about the Amazons here, although they're connected with the same group of people. There's a group called the Agra Three. That's AJATHYRSE. Agathyrsi. I can never say it. Agathyrsi, I think, is the way you say that. And they are, again, considered part of the Scythians, of the ancient Scythians, but somehow distinct. And this is the people that are forming the Transylvania Romanian people. This is the group, and it's distinct. They're Scythian, but they're somehow distinct. And so as you take that back into Greek history, you learn that Agathyrsi is the offspring of Hercules. He's actually his oldest son, and Hercules of Echidna. And Echidna is half woman and half snake, and considered the mother of monster. And so the royal bloodline of Romania tends to take this back into prehistory, back to Agathyrsi intermarrying with them. So he introduces another bloodline that creates a scion of bloodlines, which again is an important term in understanding the occult aspect of the bloodlines. And that's a little bit more distinct. And of course, Hercules is the offspring of Zeus or Zeus. And so another very, very important bloodline. So it seems to be like an ancient ennobling of this bloodline, which is what they're always trying to do, is just continue to raise the level of that pedigree, which to me suggests that you just don't want to be pure from one of the fallen angels. You would like to have all of the top seven, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
If you could. And I think that seems to be what's going on. And what's interesting about that is they
it's the
actually,
seven sciences,
in
right?
many traditions, exactly. And the seven angels of Enoch, right?
Yeah.
And this line actually takes from the not the Zeus bloodline, but the other part of that bloodline where it intermixes with the Scythians. They take their bloodlines back to an angel called Tamiel, who is an angel in first Enoch and one of the chief of tens in Enoch 6:7. Yeah. And they also consider, which I can't find anything on this to verify it. It's just the legend that comes down. But it's interesting how they invoke Enoch on this. And I can't verify this other part as well with another source. Kazadea is also considered Tamiel. And Kazadea could be because it doesn't end in EL, a lot like Semyaza compared to Azazel, within the corruption and a different meaning for the same individual, because it doesn't end in EL. But they consider Tamiel and Kazadea the same angel.
Maybe even like
interesting
Samael.
about that, yeah, could be that as well.
Yeah.
And so Kazadea is listed in Enoch 69:12 as the fifth, or Yakan, depending on how you want to pronounce that. And he taught the smiting of demons and spirits, and also taught smiting of the soul and the art of the smiting of serpent bites and the smiting of the serpent's son, Tebeket, which I'm not able to dig out of Enoch who that is or what that means, but that's the smiting aspect. And smiting means to strike or slay or kill. And of course, when you're talking about offspring of the Nephilim, they have to be killed and slain in a certain way, just as vampires do, right? Or werewolves do. And in this case, you need to take the head of a Rephaim or a Nephilim, just as we saw in the Highlander tradition, which is, again, another, recording the same type of allegories, just in a different way. And it's important because they believe that this is martial arts type hand movement combined with the forces of the occult that can actually kill spirits. And it's part of that whole occult ritual. And also as part of the ritual that goes back to Tamiel and Kazadea is that Kazadea was the one, also Azazel and other traditions, but in this case, Kazadea, bringing in the idea or concept of abortion. And what they used to do was serve this herb that would cause abortion in a tea. And a code name for this family in the royal bloods is chamomile, as in chamomile teal, which seems to be a blending of Kaza and Tamiel to perform this chamomile.
Wow, I never heard that.
And they carried this knowledge down through history and have been the sponsors of abortion all the way through and have built their wealth on that over. So again, not able to get second sourcing on that, only one sourcing on it. So, but it's an interesting tradition, and I don't know whether it's true, but it certainly fits with so much of what we know out of prehistory. And so what's interesting again is that the two most common versions of chamomile is the Roman and the German, and this family lives and this bloodline lives in Romania. Again, I don't find that a coincidence at all.
Wow, it's very interesting. I wanted to mention too that sort of near the area, but in like Serbia, is a connection to even my family line in a way, because they say that when Aradia was around in the 1300s, who was supposed to be a daughter of Diana, and she was near Lake Nemi, that the Inquisition was coming after her. So she had to flee for a little while, and she wouldn't have went to France because the papacy was well established over there, right? So she had to flee, and they say she went from central Italy to Serbia. And at that time, Gary, they had like this, I guess you could call them a cult or some sort of like almost like a Masonic group in a way, but they were called the Cagliostro. Not many people know about the Cagliostro. They were during the Middle Ages, 16th century, maybe 15th, 16th century, but they worshipped a mythical, or if you want to call her a goddess, and they called her Arada or sometimes Irodiesa. And that's very similar to Aradia from just a few 100 or 200 years before. And they also referred to her as the mistress or queen of the fairies. And of course, Diana is the queen of the fairies and all of this as well. So yes. I wonder where the Cagliostro fit in with all of this as well.
Yeah, and that's very interesting. And again, I'm not familiar with them, but there are so many different arms to this over the millennia that that would be one interesting to try and turn some information up on for sure.
Yeah, I'll send you information after the show about them. But yeah, they were supposed to be in Serbia.
I would appreciate that.
Yeah. The only thing you can really find online, if you look up Calusari, the name, and it's spelled Calusari, you look it up, because I looked it up the other day because I have it in some family writings. When I looked it up on Google, all you can find is that they did have a X-Files episode named the Calusari, which was like some Romanian exorcists that were like exorcising some boy that was filled with the devil.
Yeah, so they're keeping it alive, even though it may be a little bit more obscure.
Yeah, very obscure.
That, again, is that MO. They always keep this stuff alive throughout the history, and they keep it, in front of our noses and hidden in plain sight. And I also think there's a significant connection to this whole group out of Transylvania and the Scythians as part of that seemingly is, one of the most lack of covered historical references to this, Tartaria empire, that began with Genghis Khan, who, again, these bloodlines of Vlad are interconnected with. And one wonders, why we don't know more, because that was probably the largest land-mass the world has ever known. And we only get the superficial details of it. And that information has been kept obscured for a reason. And I think it probably pointed to too obvious of what they were trying to do, who they are, and they want to keep that information as low-key as possible, but they don't want to totally get rid of it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. It's very crazy when you think about what's going on and what's taking place. I mean, even with the princes of today being related to all these bloodlines and what's happening, it's really crazy. I mean, we could go into that for a minute if you want to talk about the Scythians. We got like 5 minutes left. If you want to go more into that, I would love to hear more about that.
About Tartaria?
Yeah, or definitely. Or even, Prince Edward and all of them, they're coming down. That line as well. This is the Sangreal, all of this. This is very interesting, and I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, we probably don't have time in 5 minutes to cover that
No.
connection
You're right.
off. But but it's all interconnected in there, and But what I would also connect into from this Scythian aspect and into Tartaria and into end time prophecy is look at the sons of Japheth and where they migrate to after Babel, and they migrate where? To Turkey, to the Black Sea area, and they intermarry with these Scythians.
Wow.
And they also take on the names like Magog and Gog and other names that go back to antediluvian giants. Okay, so now if we look at where these Tuatha De Danann Scythians and people migrated to, they migrated heavily into not only the Slavic countries, but also into the Kiev area and into the Russian area, and they become what we know as modern Russia today. Just as I think in Ezekiel 38 and 39, Magog and Gog, and part of this great alliance, are these ancient Scythians that are going to start World War III, just as you've got Magog and Magog again at the end of the 1,000-year millennia. And so you have all of this as part of that region that would be part of Tartaria. And you have Genghis Khan also thought in many accounts, to take his legendary bloodlines back to Og of Bashan, who is, one of the great giants and famous giants of the Bible that the Israelites have to take on. And he's considered the last of the Rephaim. So is Rephaim born after the flood, or is he a survivor of the Nephilim from before the flood, and somehow Rephaim is some sort of distinction in terms of that bloodline? But again, that sort of all comes together in this Tartaria empire that is so little is known about or talked about,
And you
yet
notice how
was
hot it's
so
been
very,
lately?
very
That's
important and a threat. Yes, it has for
it's so
some
hot
reason.
lately.
Yeah. I actually think what happened was they got so powerful that the other families around the world had to take them down, and they've been trying to keep them down ever since.
Yeah.
I think it's the rivalry within the clan. I guess is where I was going with it, but you're right. For a while there, and probably still is. I mean, everybody's talking about this, but nobody has any significant answers to it, right?
Sure.
And I know some people have taken them back to the Scythians, but you need to put again all of the pieces of the puzzle together if you're going to try and sort that out. And I think it's just the rival aspect of all of these different families, because at the end there's only going to be one superior ruling family if they get their way, and they're going to try, and then there'll be the second tier, which is still going to be good, and the third tier, and so on and so forth. But they're all wanting to have their bloodline as being the bloodline that is going to be on the throne of the world empire into eternity.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty intense when you think about it. And I do think that these Notre Dame cathedrals are playing a big part in this. Like they are like bringing in this this energy, this new force. They're broadcasting transmissions and being used for these rituals. And like you mentioned, the Bullion, all of these guys. I mean, they had a hand in with all of this area and the Templars and all of this these cathedrals being made. So I think that something is being broadcasted, being accomplished by these cathedrals and these rituals, that the technology is moving. Like I was talking about before you came on, it feels like technology and all the occurrences, earthquakes, volcanoes, literally the world is shaking. The pillars of the foundations of the world is shaking, and something is awakening. And it really feels like that the mark of the beast and everything is technology, that everything is like speeding up, and we're having like months and months of activity in one day. Gary, thank you for coming on. We'll have you back on again soon, next month or so. And thank you everybody for joining us. Time goes by so fast. Really appreciate it, Gary, guys. Have a good night. Fearless is up next. Spiral. Out.